Okay, 11 o'clock, and we get started. Thank you all for being here. So this is the first of three-part series webinars on competitive intelligence. This one is from strategy to organization. My name is Shaheen Khan. I get to be one of the partners at OrionX, and I'm going to do just a little bit of quick setup before we move on. If you go to orionx.net/webinar, all lowercase, you will see all the webinars that we have done. This is the fourth in the group that we've been doing. We do put a lot of effort into it. If you do like it, please do your usual share and comment and all that. But we're also trying to build over time a repository of good content that can be used for training and for reference material. The first one was about marketing in the age of coronavirus. I think we were one of the first ones to really think about the impact of that whole thing on how the marketing function operates. We did one on building your online community. Dano and I did one on how to create a podcast series, not an individual singular podcast, but a whole program around it. And this one is going to be on competitive intelligence, as well as some of the future ones. All of this is under the umbrella of our human marketing effort. We think human marketing is exactly what marketing has always done and needed, but especially now. And it is all about authenticity, empathy, and advocacy. What does that mean? That means people want to talk to someone who is real, who cares about them, and wants their success. And those are like, you can find other ways of saying the same words, but that would mean the same thing. So all of that means that there's now a new digital. We cannot do physical, in-person meetings are reduced, so digital has to make up the slack. And that means the new digital means new audience, because they are behaving different way, new content, because they want the content to be like what we talked about, and also new competition, which is relevant to what we're talking about today, because in the digital world, the field is a lot more level. And smaller companies and smaller organizations, it's all about the quality of engagement, as we say on the right-hand side. It's a new mission for digital. And it's all about the quality of engagement, the ongoing relationship that you have, the human contacts that we have and we cultivate, and indeed cultivating a whole community, external community, as well as internal community. This is a list of, it is my only advertising, maybe the last one too, but there's one advertising page. This is the OrionX services. I will wait until you read all of these. No, I'm joking. Basically, if you think about market execution, that's the umbrella that we do, and we do it through industry analysis, going relatively deep into some of the major trends in the technology and trying to simplify them and try to bring the salient points so that we can then do the market execution and also inform our content marketing and demand generation. With that, we can get into the actual topic of this, and that only took me 3 minutes, so that's not bad. So this is Competitive Intelligence webinar series. This is in 3 acts. The first picture back on the heading was Obi-Wan Kenobi, of course. And of course, when you think about competitive intelligence or about just really anything, that is the personification of someone who is fully aware and has complete control over every little thing that they do. And that sort of awareness is a very big part of competitive intelligence. So are these guys, who are able to put 2 and 2 together in ways that few people can. So this particular webinar is about strategy to organization. This is when you flip the switch and say, we want the competitive intelligence function, and how do we structure it, and what are some of the big rules that we need to follow. Part 2 is going to be organization to intelligence. What do you do with the data that you gather? How do you analyze and do the synthesis part of it? And part 3 is going to be intelligence to action, some of the more rubber meets the road kind of activity where you do the sales enablement. Now, what is competitive intelligence? Several different definitions of this, and they're all, again, pretty similar. But the big thing for us is that competitive intelligence is an organization, unlike competitive analysis, which is an activity. So when you talk about competitive intelligence, you really mean to formalize it in some ways. And you're trying to recognize that competitive intelligence, just like quality, has to permeate the organization. And it needs to be everybody's job. And you're trying to just be aware of the choices that your customers have. So it's an organization that is focused on competitiveness, That competitiveness can be national competitiveness, corporate competitiveness, or indeed sales deal by deal competitiveness. So the math is the same. The concepts are the same, even though you may apply it to smaller or larger scopes of what you're talking about. It is focused on understanding your quote unquote supply chain in a broad way. And by supply chain, we mean market trends, your strengths, and customers' needs, behaviors, and choices. So the more you understand about what other choices your customers have, the more you really go deeper into the supply chain. And the more you understand how you might position yourself better or what attributes to really highlight or build on. And of course, this organization also builds tools and processes to win strategically, but also to win tactically. So it helps set policy, but it also builds the tools and the engagements and the processes to go do the battle on a daily basis. So I'm going to give you a bit of a strategic framework. This is how we like to do it. Every time I've done it, this has kind of worked. So I'm pretty big on doing this. I start with Michael Porter's 5 forces. He's a professor at Harvard, one of the luminaries of this world, and some of his thinking just is everywhere in the competitive intelligence world. So he defined industry rivalry based on the interplay of you, that kind of is you in the middle, but it's a threat of substitutes. These are substitutes that customers can choose instead of you. They're not identical, but they are alternatives. There are threat of new entrants. If you have a brand of coffee, somebody else can come in with a new brand of coffee. The substitute could be like if you drink tea instead of coffee, but it's similar. And then you have the bargaining power of the suppliers and the bargaining power of buyers. So supplier, buyer, substitute, entrant, you in the middle, and industry rivalry ensues. Now, this really starts kind of looking like a tiny piece of the supply chain. So what we have done is to take that Porter's 5 forces and apply it to a supply chain. So now you're in the middle, you've got a supplier, your customer's on the right-hand side, your substitute competitor is coming from above, your new entrant, disruptive competitor is coming from the bottom, and life would be fine as it is, except that it isn't, because things change. Now, one way they can change is that you can get pushed upstream. You could start competing with your suppliers, or your suppliers try to compete with you. So if you go a little bit upstairs, move upstream, then who is your customer? Are you now selling to the original customer that you had, or do you need to change the clientele that you seek because you're now building something else? Likewise, it happens in the other direction when you get pushed downstream, and now the customer really isn't buying what you used to have. Maybe they want something else that is built on top of what you have, and you have to really decide whether you want to participate in that or not. A very good example of that is software as a service, and you build it on top of a cloud, and what is the customer really buying? They're not buying what they used to buy, they're buying something else. So all of this really leads to a framework that you need to understand about what it is that you offer, where you are in the supply chain, who you are, and who do you sell to. And if you don't know that, it's going to be hard to kind of do the competitive analysis. So we start with the same picture here, market forces from the top, technology trends, market forces, those are some of the disruptors. From the bottom, you've got risk management and active investment that mitigates some of the threats of what these changes are going to bring. And then see what happens. If you kind of just push the supply chain up, you can go all the way up, and you can say at every step of the supply chain, is that you, is that your customer, or is that your supplier? And every stage of that supply chain is going to have a substitute competitor coming from the top, a new entrant competitor coming from the bottom, and your customer all the way at the right-hand side. I want to highlight this software as a service cloud thing that I mentioned, because that's really when a new category is created. Let's say you're a system vendor or a software vendor, and now these cloud guys kind of muscle or wiggle their way through, and now you got kind of, you're a little bit farther away from your customer now. A whole new category has been created. What do you do about it? Do you go build your own cloud? Do you build on top of somebody else's cloud? Are they your foe? Are they your friend? And figuring that out is exactly something that we're observing in the market right now. And different vendors are reacting to it differently according to their realities, and we'll see how many of them get it right. So a big part of that, after that framework, is some of the important data and processes that you need. A proposed model that we have, and this is in fact the OrionX strategy model, is that you start out with, will it achieve the business objective, and can it be implemented? Those are two very critical questions in a lot of these projects that happen, especially in bigger companies, because smaller companies have different realities. And many times you come up with something wonderful, but it just fails the change management aspect of it. It just doesn't get adopted at all, or really too many antibodies in the system. And does it actually achieve the objective? Many other times you do a lot of projects that really are great on paper, but really don't move the needle. So the process that we do is that you start out with data at the bottom, and then you build on it. You do analysis, you do synthesis, and you do change management, change acceleration, etc., or participation. All of those are what you need to do that change management. The types of data that we recommend that you do, some of this is drawn from the work that we do as an industry analyst firm, and we have a couple of decision tools there where we have come up with some taxonomy and structure for the data that we collect. So on the product and technology side, we look at the customer needs, and customer's readiness to adopt the technology. In terms of providing a product in the market, we look at the market presence of a company and the market trends that are aligned with or opposing the product and the offering and the roadmap that you have. And then in terms of the product itself, what are its capabilities today, and what is the roadmap that is going to take it to the future? So you put that on this, little cute circular diagram, and it gives you a little feel for where you stand. On the right-hand side, you do the same thing with market forces and trends. Now, if you have a mega trend, let's say, it's IoT, for example. Now you look at the market part of it. Is it mature? Is it valid? Does the market kind of take it? What's the market validity, market maturity? On the product side, what is the impact of the product, and what is the cost of the product? Many times these new technologies are just too expensive to implement compared to what you have before. And that economics delays their adoption. From a customer standpoint, how relevant is it to what they're doing now? And what is the urgency of implementing it right now? So that's kind of 6 different dimensions that you can look at for each of these categories. And then you also need customer and sales data in the middle. You want to do needs analysis for the customers, find out their investment priorities, their buying behavior, what is their corporate roadmap, not product roadmap, corporate roadmap. Who do they want to be in 2, 5, 6, 10 years? You want to do win-loss analysis. If you win, why? If you lose, why? If somebody else won it, why did they win it? You want to do customer satisfaction. And of course, you always want to know whether your customers are referenceable or not. And then you kind of take that from there. How do you do the inbound gathering? The right-hand side is quick. The left-hand side is quick way of gathering data. The right-hand side is systematic. If you do ad hoc, it's things like customer visits, briefing center, when customers show up, you do some web research. Every time you interact with customers, whether it's PR, AR, or outside entities, you gather data and you look at your customers' success story collateral. If you do a little bit more project-based, you become a little bit more systematic. You do online surveys, one-on-one interviews, product blogs, focus groups. If you have staff on site at a customer, you can ask them to keep their eyes open and gather salient data that they can send to you. And then leading edge customers are always a good beacon because they see the future and they're willing to talk about it. And then if you turn it into a corporate process, now that's when you really are systematically gathering data. So now you can establish a baseline and do repeated data gathering. You can have things like a customer advisory board or a user group organization. You can do regular satisfaction, loyalty surveys. You now have a competitive intelligence function that gathers a lot of data. Corporate strategy process always gathers a lot of data, and you can tap into that. Social media, CRM, et cetera, et cetera. So that is a big part of what you do, and you want to be conscious about where you are in this thing. Then you do a bunch of analysis work. You look at market trends, you look at customer values, The customer values are, what is their time horizon? There are companies that are buying something literally for the next 25 years. So their selection process is very different from someone who's just buying something for a couple of months because it's just filling a, it's a Band-Aid, right? Reminds me that you always want to know whether your product is a vitamin or an aspirin. Is it just good to have, or is it really addressing a pain point? You want to understand the complexity of their buying process. What is their risk tolerance? If you sell to a really big enterprise, they are a lot more risk averse, and they've got the money and the wherewithal to really not care about the latest bells and whistles. Whereas if you go to some of the more mid-sized companies, they have a much more burning need for competitive advantage and probably better willingness to adopt a new technology. And of course, the scale of deployments. Can you even do a 45 location implementation globally? Or do you have to build your way towards that? Then you want to do the same thing for brand attributes. What do investors, customers, employees, and influencers think about your brand? You want to do the traditional SWOT analysis. Everybody knows this, but I put it there anyway. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And then you want to come up with a market map. This is another thing that we do that is really interesting. And it looks at market trends, brand permission. Is your company even eligible to really go after this particular area? What are the customer needs in that market, and what are the barriers for entry? Who else is there? Why are they strong? And then you want to do a bunch of product and technology head-to-head comparisons and the traditional competitive analysis work, comparative analysis work that you do. Okay, so now this gets us to this slide, and in this case, I actually do want to go through this particular one. So you want to build a machine. That's kind of the thing on the left-hand side. You want to build a machine that is operating, and that machine is built up. I'm going to go from bottom to top, and that is going to be built on infrastructure. What are the inputs to the process? What is the process? What is the output? That is also going from the bottom to top is the so-called SIPOC process that exists, especially in the Six Sigma world, where you got the supplier, input, process, output, consumer, SIPOC. And then you have metrics, and then who is really the consumer of the information. So the consumer, as you go from left to right, you kind of roughly mimic smaller to bigger companies. When you start out, you really just are looking at the field force, the partners, and maybe the press, maybe the customers, obviously, because they're consuming the material eventually. As you move to the right, you get a little bit more towards executives and industry and financial analysts. And if you're in a bigger company, each business unit is going to be its own mega company or mini company. And then you eventually even get to customer executives. So some of the metrics that are important when you're small is just win rate. How many times am I winning? How effective is my program? Is it moving the needle on revenue? And as you move to like bigger companies, start worrying about what is my market presence? Am I doing the earnings analysis of my competition and market share, et cetera? And ultimately, what is my predictive nature of what I do? How good am I in predicting what the market is going to do and what the competition is going to do? So from back to the bottom, you have data sources, staffing, systems, data management, et cetera. A lot of that is a direct function of how much budget you get and how you organize yourself, which we're going to talk in a bit. On top of that, you're going to do all the MBA work that we just talked about, the analysis work, competitive analysis, buying behavior, market trends, et cetera. The key processes, and that's why it's highlighted, are the processes that you do want to staff, and you want to make sure that they operate uninterrupted or as necessary. So sales support, a lot of companies, of course, have that. Competitive analysis, win-loss, customer reference program. As you move to the bigger company kind of a mode, you do earnings and market share process. You have an internal account management process. If you're working for a really big company, the internal account management is very, very important in terms of support for the program and also understanding whether or not it's doing its job. And then you want to have an early warning system process that we had at some point that was very, very effective. And then on top of that, you get all the outputs, sales tools, whether or not you want to build a situation room or revenue forecast, executive data, input to strategy, etc. So that gives you a flavor of what you really are trying to accomplish and what sort of organization you need to accomplish it. So that leads us to organizational issues. Typically, the way these things start is through a fire drill. Somebody sees an ad in the airport when that starts coming back again, and they come back home, usually a high executive that says, well, I don't like the way they're doing, we got to do this, so get this done. You build a tiger team, and that's basically borrowed resources. You don't allocate any permanent resources. You just get people to add it to their day job for a brief period of time. They may need to go buy something, so you give them some discretionary budget, but it's a one-time budget. And because this is a strategy du jour kind of a thing, the focus on it eventually fades, and it's really hard to maintain it. And that's too bad. So this typical picture is not what you want. You don't want to do it this way. You learn a lot. The people who are engaged in it learned a lot, but the organizational learning of it really doesn't carry on, and you lose a lot of value. So how it should be done is a little bit more coordinated. On the top, you've got ongoing programs from left to right that look at the pain points and the stakeholders and gaps analysis and do all those traditional stuff that needs to be done for something that has got durability and a cadence. You look at objectives and metrics, and you got sales tools and corporate programs and launch. On the bottom, you get data back, customer data, market data, product data. And on the right-hand side, you got a core program, which is kind of the engine that drives all of it. And that's the organization, the CI organization. Even if it's a skeleton crew, you've got sales campaigns that are always the tip of the arrow. And some companies also have a public campaign. And this is not for everyone. Not every company does, but occasionally companies are a little bit more competitively vocal in a public way than others. A lot has to do with who runs the company and what their appetite is for getting and giving a bloody nose. If you do it properly, it actually can help you get a lot of attention in the market today. The dimensions of competitive intelligence. So you got strategy. Hopefully we figured it out by now. A structure that we're going to discuss and see how we want to do that. We talked about processes. We talked about some of the content that's going to come out of this process. And of course, we're going to tee some of these up and come back and cover them in future webinars. The data we talked about, the skill set, analysis and synthesis, those are part of the proposed model, but it's important to note that they're different skill sets. Usually people who are really good at analysis may or may not be good at synthesis and vice versa. And if you find someone who's good at both, just grab them for the 6 months that you can before they get promoted. But it's a pretty rare talent to be good at both of them. And then communication in terms of internal and external communication and the processes that you build to make sure that you do that. All right, now the elements of success, what you really want is accurate data, aligned and budgeted resources, efficient processes, all to give you increased market presence and increased market share. Now, the organizational models up there, some of the standard ones, you can have a centralized organization. It gives you consistency. It is kind of easier to get funding. It actually is more difficult, sorry. It's more difficult to get funding and more difficult to get support, more difficult to get communication, because to just go build a whole central group in a big way is a pretty big lift for many companies. The flip side is a completely decentralized, where you just kind of, it's like a tiger team that has now been more formalized, and you go grab who you can when you can. You can have a fast response, you can experiment, but it is uncoordinated, it lacks holistic view, and it may or may not work. So what we have liked that we've implemented a couple of times is the hub and spoke model. When you have a very skeleton crew in the headquarters, so to say, the corporate, and then the rest of the company has a community is built that participates. But it takes time, it takes vigilance, but you can in fact have best of both if you do it. So that a lot of onus is on the central team to make sure that model works. And then you want to know, how is it formed? Who does it report to? Is it strategic or a tactical mission? Is it company-wide or a particular product or a BU? Is it reactive or is it proactive? And if there are execs involved, who has the need and who has the veto power? Because there are execs that really have the need for competitive intelligence, and it is easy to get their support. There are execs that really don't have the need, but they have the veto power, and you kind of need to get their support in advance before you move forward. Now here I'm going to spend the next maybe 5 minutes going through 12 prescriptions, and I'm going to do it really quickly. So don't compromise integrity. This is always the top #1 most important rule. You want to win legally and ethically. What does that mean? That means if somebody gives you confidential material from your competition, you don't want to accept it. You want to send it straight to your legal department and have them deal with it, and they have ways of dealing with it that keeps everything kosher. If you get something, an illicit price list from a competition, don't accept it. One time when I actually was the so-called chief competitive officer, I got a call from one of our competitors who said that I have the dial-in number for the weekly call of your competition, company that he was leaving. Well, we did not accept that. We could have, we didn't. You want to win legally and ethically, because if you don't, it's the beginning of the end and you're just poisoning the activity. Number 2, take it seriously. Whoever takes it more seriously wins. If your competition takes you more seriously, they got a leg up. Respect your competition. If customers are buying them, find out why. There's probably a very good reason. They're probably not as bad as you think you are. Their feature benefits probably work better than you think they do. Lead versus react. You want to project your own vision versus react to what your competition does. Sometimes the only way to do that is to just pause, step back, and say, what am I really trying to do? What is my leadership play? And what am I going to do that is just not matching and replicating others? You want to create a competitive intelligence roadmap. These things, as I mentioned, usually start in a reactive tiger team sort of a way. You want to move it to the coordinated proof of concept way. Finally, you want it to get resourced and established, and ultimately it becomes ingrained in the organization and it becomes a trusted part of the corporate operating system, if you will. Make it ongoing. Don't do a program. Don't make an half-built abandoned bridge that you're going to blow up because it didn't work. So make it a program, but fail fast, make decisions, move quickly. One-off projects really don't retain the value. And, I don't want to say you're better off not even doing them, because sometimes they actually do move the needle, but it's pretty close. I would really recommend not to do that. Trust your team to interpret data. Otherwise, go get a new team. Especially when you first get started, the credibility of the competitive intelligence group is extremely important. And that means when you present data to your management, to your colleagues, to your peers, it needs to be accepted. You kind of want the nods of approval. If, the litmus test is when some big exec says, show me the data. When they say, show me the data, they mean they don't trust your interpretation of the data, right? Imagine calling some big guru in the market. You never tell them, show me the data. I mean, maybe after the 5th time you talk to them, you say, is there a data? Track at least 3 types of data. We talked about that. Build skills in synthesis. As I mentioned earlier, synthesis is the purpose of analysis, and there are different skill sets. Excel in tactical first. Tactical is like the cover charge before you get to do the strategic. Then you can become strategic. So you want to have a system and know how to operate it before you can set the course and start doing directions. So build the engine, build the machine, run clean fuel through it, put the right dashboards in front of your peers and execs, and now you earn the right to go do strategic activity. Ask so what repeatedly, especially when you talk about feature function of the product. So what? Well, I can do this. So what? You want to do this really. My joke is that you want to do this until people get really annoyed. And when they are finally annoyed and kind of semi-angry, then they just blurt out what the real value of a particular feature is. That's when you get to the salient point. And then you want to build an internal community. As I said, competitiveness is like quality. It's everyone's business. We used to actually have awards, a monthly award for the best competitive intelligence person in the company. It wasn't a monetary award, it was just recognition. But it was a way of trying to bring everybody who spends any amount of time doing competition, and a lot of people in the company do, to bring their knowledge and expertise to us. So my summary, it's competitive intelligence permeates everything. It's a program, not a one-off, more offensive, less defensive, project your leadership, less reacting. It's quality, not quantity. You want to identify the success metrics. You want to set objectives and remind yourself and everybody repeatedly. And you want to get help to jumpstart if you need to. So with that, I go to this final slide. The photos you see are our core team at OrionX. We also have quite a nice extended team that we love working with. If you want to simplify these megatrends, 5G, IoT, HPC, AI, blockchain, quantum, talk to us. We spend a lot of time studying these things and finding out what the salient points are and how it can inform your strategy and your marketing activities. We talked about human marketing. Please check it out. Go to orionx.net/human-marketing and see what that all is about. We talked about the community and the strategy, a community strategy and a program development as a webinar, customer-focused content creation. We did a webinar on podcasts, and we're going to do more on others. Obviously, we talked about competitive intelligence and other webinars and podcasts that our research analysts can host. So with that, I pause and I go to questions. There are 5 questions. Sharon said, yeah, you're right, Sharon. Sharon says, you said 5 forces, but I saw 4 boxes. Yes, in fact, the industry rivalry is kind of the 5th force, the way I understand it. And also, as you know, we've kind of taken that model and changed it a little bit because we are trying to use it in a supply chain kind of a way. So if it's not identical, it is at least inspired by what he said. There's another question. How has the competitive analysis function and its strategic approach changed in the time of COVID? Well, this is a very, very good question. I think people are a little bit more sensitive to not do anything that is distasteful and be a little bit more careful in terms of how aggressively they go after competition, because we all want to be sensitive that way. And the whole human marketing thing is all about caring, but it's also about winning ethically, and it's about deserving to win, if you will. So to the extent that competitive intelligence can help you get better, that I think is a very good thing. And to look at it that way would be a good thing. All right. Then there was another question that was there, and which group within an organization generally funds the CI function? In smaller companies, it is entirely driven by sales. And if sales really feels like they need it, they're the ones that usually raise the flag, sales and product management. How it gets funded is a little bit more all over the map. In bigger companies, it's usually corporate marketing or corporate strategy. It could be the overall head of sales. So with that, I will pause because we are at 11:33. I thank you for this. Please reach out to us either at OrionX_net on Twitter, or send us an email, info@orionx.net. Thank you very, very much.